So the other day on my live stream, twitch.tv/DragonBlitz, I thought it'd be a fun idea to go through every single Metroidvania I've ever played and rank them in a tier list from F tier to S tier. Feel free to let me know what you think about the tier list in the comments below. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. Real quick, I just want to explain how I'm ranking these games. Obviously, personal enjoyment is important to me, but I also want to give credit to games that I think are following what I believe to be the tenets of what make a Metroidvania game a Metroidvania. So the way I'm ranking them is based off of three major factors. These are the three most important things that you need to consider when making a Metroidvania: the movement, the exploration, and the combat. These three things, they can all feed into each other. They can all be cohesive parts of the experience. But I'm going to be kind of breaking down each game into these three sections because I think all three of them are very important. Starting with movement. Movement is the most important thing, in my opinion, when it comes to a Metroidvania because it is how you interact with the world itself. You need to be able to move through the world in order to explore and in order to have combat encounters. So movement is the basis that holds everything together. So if the movement doesn't feel fun, if the movement isn't cohesive, if the movement doesn't feel like you are being rewarded for finding new movement options and using those new movement options, then it can make the game feel pretty weak. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize when it comes to movement is a lot of Metroidvanias are based around backtracking. But the thing is if you're backtracking through an area, you're essentially going through the area again, the same way that you did last time. It's like, the way I think of it is like when you die in a platformer and it forces you to replay a section, Metroidvanias have that moment of forcing you to replay a section. It is part of the game. Having your movement feel enjoyable and fluid just to play around with, it makes backtracking a lot less punishing. The next key tenet is exploration. So exploration is what sets apart a Metroidvania from being a platformer. Because platformers can have movement, they can have combat, but if you aren't rewarded for exploring alternate parts of the world, alternate paths, finding secrets, then in my opinion, it's not really a Metroidvania. And a lot of Metroidvanias, I think, can fall into the trap of just not rewarding exploration enough. Because if you don't reward the player for exploring the world that you made, they're going to stop exploring, and then that cuts out a huge portion of what makes your game unique as a Metroidvania. Backtracking through areas with new abilities should always reward the player. Otherwise, it's going to make the backtracking not feel rewarding. It's going to make the exploration feel like a waste of time, and then the player is going to be trained into thinking like, oh, there's no point in exploring because I'm not being rewarded for it. Or the ways that you can reward exploration is either by giving the player new items, new abilities, new powerful consumables like potions or whatever. It can make the game easier in some regards by giving you better armor or better equipment. The other thing is also, in a way, you can also reward exploration through non-direct gameplay means by having immersive atmosphere or art direction, art design. This is something that happens a lot in Symphony of the Night, for example, is you enter a room and the room itself is so uniquely designed that your reward is just seeing the room. So it doesn't always have to be gameplay related. It could just be like a fun little experience, right? Lastly is combat. Combat is anything that you use to deal with conflict in your game. It could be a literal combat system where you swing your sword or throw items and kill bad guys. Just anything that is like, this is the main conflict of the game and this is how you resolve that conflict. The combat itself needs to feel compelling because everything that you do in the game is based around whatever the main conflict of the game is, you have to go resolve it. So if combat isn't properly balanced, it could just make for unfun Metroidvania design or just unfun moments in a Metroidvania. I would say combat is something that it's the most malleable out of the other two design aspects that we've already talked about. So you can make combat into like whatever you want. The very first game we're going to be talking about is Hollow Knight. It is a game that took me 15 hours of pretty frustrating gameplay, pretty frustrating experience. The exploration just didn't feel right. The movement felt a little stiff. The combat felt really difficult. But after sitting and playing the game for 15 hours on 2 separate playthroughs, there's a moment where the game just clicks. The game finally starts to be a full experience. It takes a long time, and that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people get either turned off by this game or aren't really interested in it. Others, I think, are able to click with the game's design a lot faster than I did, but once it clicked, the game became probably one of the most fun Metroidvania experiences I've ever had. But I will say the first 15 hours were incredibly frustrating. One thing that I think this game does insanely well is the exploration of this game is not rewarded the best. The rewards, you need to kind of like know what they are. Because like, for example, these grubs are spilled all throughout the world. I didn't know what they did because the game doesn't teach you anything. The game is very opaque. It doesn't like show you what it wants you to do. You have to figure all that stuff out for yourself, which is one of the reasons why I think maybe playing this game with a guide for somebody who's a little bit more impatient like I am could have saved a lot of trouble. So the exploration is rewarding, but you need to know what those rewards actually do, which makes it a little obscure to the player. The movement for this game, I think, starts off incredibly basic. All you have is a walk and a jump and like a slash, but you can learn more about like pogoing off of enemies, which does increase your movement and also is a part of combat. The movement gets fleshed out. It just takes a long time for you to get all of your abilities. And then there gets to a point in the game where late game, you have all of the movement. You've already explored most of the game. And then you have these really difficult combat encounters. And I think this is where the game shines more so than anything else, is like fights like this, like the Grim fight, fights like the final boss and stuff like that. This is where the game is at its best, is when the game gives you a very difficult boss fight and you just have to overcome everything that the boss is throwing at you, using the movement, using the spells that you're given, using the combat skills that you gain. And I think that's where this game is at its best. It obviously has a 10 out of 10 when it comes to like production value and conveyance. Like, this game is a beautiful game to look at. It has fantastic music, fantastic sound design, and everything about it is like very, very good. It just takes a long time for some people, especially people that are impatient, for it to all click. And for that reason, I'm rewarding this game with, this game is getting a S rank from me. This is an S tier video game in my opinion. It might not be for everybody, but when it comes to Metroidvanias, there are very few games that I think deserve an S ranking other than this game. This game does almost everything perfectly. I just wish that it was a little bit easier to get into. That's my biggest complaint. There is ratings that are higher than S, but I will give it S tier. It is above and beyond one of the best Metroidvanias. To explain it a little bit better, on your first playthrough, this game is kind of like a C+. But once you've finished the game once, or once you're going for more than just the bad ending, that's when the game becomes an S tier video game. On your first playthrough, it might not feel like an S tier video game, but once you've sat down and explored the systems to their fullest, it does become an S tier video game. And that's game number 1. The next game that I will be reviewing is Bloodstained, Ritual of the Night. Visually, the game has moments where it looks pretty good. I think this area, the game looks fantastic. It looks great. It looks like a pretty decent, indie game. But there are other areas where the game does not look so good. I think this area is pretty bad. The colors are kind of gross to look at. Everything is just kind of brown and muted coloring. Certain enemies, like, they're just very shiny. The world looks oily. There's just like some weird lighting that just doesn't make sense in a lot of areas. The very late game areas are also, in my opinion, pretty dang ugly. This is always my example of like one of the ugliest looking areas. Like, look at the rock textures. It just looks like it's made out of like sludge and oil. Like, yeah, look how bright and blooming and like difficult it is to look at this screenshot. And in gameplay, it makes for a frustrating experience where you can't really see what's going on as clearly as you would like to. I've always found the visuals to be actually a big detractor for one of the reasons why I don't like this video game as much as I think that a lot of other people do. Other people find the graphics to not be an issue. That's fine. That's your opinion. It is what it is. But getting back to the core tenets before I get way too out of depth here, is let's talk about the movement. The movement in this game is actually pretty decent. Let me find a speedrun actually. So the way that you move in this game is this like backdash cancel, where you're backdashing and then crouching to cancel that, and you do that over and over and over again. It just gives you something to do while you're moving, which I find to be a underappreciated aspect of certain Metroidvanias. Is like, yeah, you could be walking during this section, but also you have a backdash, and you can optimize how you backdash and like the timing of your backdashes to make you move ever so slightly faster. It gives you a certain level of skill expression that exists in the game, which is nice. And that's something that not a lot of Metroidvanias will mess around with. Igarashi, for whatever reason, is fine with having like backdash cancels in his game, which is cool. I think that it is a cool mechanical advantage that you get basically at the beginning of the game. But the big issue with this game in particular is like, this is the core movement option that you use for 90% of the game. Once you get the double jump, you can start dive kicking. You can work in some slides, some dive kicks and stuff like that. But like, the majority of this game is you're just kind of backdashing. So the movement gets very boring very fast, especially if you're somebody that cares a lot about fluidity of movement. Doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again with no things to spice it up makes the gameplay and the movement specifically feel a little bit boring. One thing that I will give this game is its combat is interesting. This game uses the shard system, which is similar to Souls in Dawn of Sorrow or Aria of Sorrow. So, like, you could use very powerful, like, spells at the cost of magic, which I think is cool. It creates really interesting combat opportunities. This game also has, like, combat backdash canceling, so you can swing your sword and then cancel that with, like, a backdash. You can cancel your swings with jumping attacks sometimes. I will say that the combat is, for my opinion, it's pretty good. And the last thing I will say is this is the exploration aspect. This game is massive. This game is massive, massive, massive. Can I get a look at the map, actually? This map is huge, and most of it feels empty. You're basically just walking through an area that has maybe a couple of enemies in it, and that's it. I never found I was rewarded from exploration itself. I never found interesting items. I never found interesting rooms that had cool things in them. Every once in a while you would. Like Garden of Silence has the room with the piano in it, stuff like that. It just feels empty, because most of the things that you do to upgrade your character isn't stuff you find in the world. So the majority of how you actually upgrade your character, it's either you buy stuff in the shop, you upgrade it through crafting. So the crafting system takes over for a lot of the exploration. You get crafting recipes instead of like just being given an item, which gives you an extra layer of like friction between getting the reward that you get for like exploration. So it feels disconnected. So exploration, in my opinion, isn't rewarded very well. I will say this game is lacking a lot of polish in a lot of areas, but it's decent in a lot of other areas. So my final verdict is I'm giving it a B-. It's slightly above average. Like, I will say this is worth playing through maybe once, maybe twice, if you're a big fan of Metroidvanias. But I wouldn't like super recommend this as like the best game ever made. I wouldn't say you have to play it. If this doesn't like appeal to you, if it doesn't look like it appeals to you, you can probably skip this game. But if you're like really looking for a Metroidvania to play, try out Bloodstained. The next game is a little game called Gato Roboto. Gato Roboto is a very short Metroidvania. You can 100% of the game in about 2 hours, but you play as a little cat, and your whole goal is to get off of this like alien planet. It's very cute. It has like this Game Boy aesthetic. The main way that you play in the game, though, is you get this little robot suit that you can take control of, explore this little world. It's a very, very well-made Metroidvania, in my opinion. Art style is really good. The music's really good. The setting and overall aesthetic is really good. Movement-wise, it's pretty basic. You kind of run, you kind of jump, you kind of shoot. This game does have some momentum with it, though, so you do accelerate into your max speed after like a second or so when you're walking. So it gives you a little bit of momentum and fluidity to the movement. You can extend your jumps later in the game with your blaster ability. Like, you shoot down to get like an extra jump. You get a double jump that also can like pogo off of enemies. So you get other movement options, but none of them I would consider like a holy crap, this is like amazing movement option, but they're all pretty solid. It's fun enough to keep you engaged, and the game is short enough that you never feel too bad that you're missing movement options. Another thing that's important to note is the way the exploration works in this game is that the whole world is kind of divided into these little zones, and the zones themselves are kind of self-isolated, which fixes a lot of the issues that I find with a lot of modern Metroidvanias and backtracking. So essentially the way that it works is you go to a zone, and the zone is open, and there's usually some sort of like puzzle or like thing that you need to do. Like in this level, you're draining the water level to unlock new stuff. But there's usually like a main route that you take, then you fight the boss, and then after you finish fighting the boss, the rest of the level opens up to you, and then you can backtrack and grab all the collectibles. I find that to be a very nice experience because the game feels like a Metroidvania while also maintaining some level of linear structure, so you don't feel lost. It is very, very difficult to get lost in this game, and the game is small enough that if you take the wrong route, it's very quick to just turn around and get back onto the correct route. So I feel like the movement's decent, the exploration is decent, and then the combat honestly feels a lot like Super Metroid. It's obviously a Metroid-inspired game, but instead of having a limited ammo supply, you actually have an unlimited ammo supply. Oh, you do get a dash later that's really cute. But it's based off of an overheating system. So on the left-hand side, you always have access to your missiles, but they can overheat, so you have them on a cooldown, basically. So yeah, you mix in combat based off of like dodging with your dash, double jumping out of the way, and throwing missiles at enemies. There's also like a charge blaster that you get later. Overall, very, very solid experience. I would say Gato Roboto for me gets an A. This is definitely a huge recommend. If you haven't played it, try it out. You can finish the game in like an hour. So it's a very small, bite-sized Metroidvania, but it doesn't overstay its teammates welcome, and you just have a fun time the entire way through, and you can beat it in one sitting, so there's no chance you'll ever get lost. Next up, oh, this one's gonna hurt. The next game I'm reviewing is CHASM. For reference, I played this game like 4 years ago or something like that, so not everything is fresh in my mind. The art style for this game is fantastic. I love the art style. The music was really good. A lot of the gameplay was inspired by Castlevania, but the issue is, and the main gimmick is of this game, is the map is procedurally generated. So you get randomized like sets of rooms, which sounds cool. It sounds like it, oh wow, that must mean like a lot of replay value because it's going to be slightly different every single time that you play. That's implying that you want to play this game more than once. And I'm going to be honest, I never found a reason to try and play this game more than once. So what it ends up actually feeling like is it ends up feeling like a game with a bunch of rooms that feel like they don't connect at all because they're procedurally generating. Let's talk about the movement. The movement in this game is dog shit. Your options are walk, jump, slide down ledges. I think you get a double jump at some point, and you have like a backdash, but the backdash is the worst backdash I've ever seen in a video game. It's so bad. This animation of this backdash, by the way, you're stuck in that animation the whole time. This backdash right here, until I jump, that's literally how long you're locked into the animation. You can't cancel out of it earlier. So using a backdash as like some sort of like additional movement option doesn't feel good. And using it as an option to like, this is what the backdash looks like when you use it multiple times in a row. And there's end lag. That's what it looks like. It's so bad. So having a bad backdash for both combat, because you can't use it in combat, and it's slow for movement. There's no use in using the backdash at all. The combat in this game does not feel great. It feels like your best option is to just spam jumping attacks and then spam sub-weapons, and that's it. And then exploration is also really, really bad. So a lot of the time you're just exploring these areas, trying to find something useful, and there's nothing useful. It all feels empty, and you never find anything of value because they can't give you overpowered stuff at the beginning of areas because it's procedurally generated. So the procedural generation was like a cool gimmick, but it ended up like ruining a lot of the design of this game. So my final review for CHASM is it's a D. It's not good. This game has great presentation and it looks good and it looks like it would be a fun game. Like I love the sprite work. I love the music, but actually sitting down and playing this game is miserable. This is the worst Metroidvania I've ever played start to finish. This is the worst Metroidvania that I actually finished because I did finish this game. I played it all the way to the end, begrudgingly the whole time. I was not having fun. The next game on the list is a little game called Axiom Verge. What is there to say about Axiom Verge? It's honestly, if you like Super Metroid, you like this game. They are very, very similar. I think the presentation is very good. It also has its own unique style. It's like this weird, like Lovecraftian horror mixed with like digital stuff. Like a big part of this game is about like using like corruption in pixels and stuff like that to your advantage. The world itself is very interesting. Like even your dash like looks glitchy and stuff like that. So there's like a lot of like video game references. But this game is mostly, if you've played Super Metroid, you've played this game. It's very, very similar with a lot of like somewhat unique spins. But it's very, very solid. I remember having fun most of the way through. My only complaint is on my playthrough. I never found a reason to stop using the like second weapon you get in the game, which is like this like green shotgun blast. The movement is fine. It's you just walk and you jump, you shoot, you get extra movement options like you can send out a little ball to like crawl around for you, kind of like the morph ball. Combat is interesting. It's a lot of shooting. I will say, this is the fast travel system of the game. Backtracking in this game is kind of rough because you basically, if the area you're trying to get to doesn't connect through this like central hallway, this is just like a giant tube. If the area you want to get to doesn't connect here, it takes forever to get to. I don't have much else to say about this game other than it's solid, it's decent. It has some cool ideas that I think are well executed. Oh yeah, I forgot it has this little grapple hook like Bionic Commando. It's cute. It's a very cute game if you like retro games, if you like Metroidvanias. It is a solid game. I don't have too much to complain about it. And I will be ranking this as a B. Okay, this is kind of cheating, but I'm going to say it anyways. The next Metroidvania that I'm reviewing is, of course, Vampire Survivors. So, what is there to say about Vampire Survivors? The only reason it's on this list is not because it's a Metroidvania. It's just a lot of fun, and it's obviously, if you're a fan of Castlevania, the art design, the weapon design, you're gonna be a fan of this game. It's obviously not a true Metroidvania. It's much more of a roguelike than anything else, but I find this game so charming, so endearing. I needed to put it on the list. I'm giving it the high regard of A+. Very, very fun game. I haven't finished the game because the game is massive, and you constantly do more and more playthroughs of it. So maybe with more, I would even put this in the S tier if I unlocked more stuff. Maybe I would find out, oh, actually this game is an S tier game, but I'm gonna give it an A+ for now. I've given it maybe 15 or 20 hours of gameplay, and there's still more to do. So also, it just came out on mobile. It's also a mobile game. So the next game is a little game called Monster Sanctuary. This is a Pokemon-inspired Metroidvania. I think it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun playing it. I still haven't finished my playthrough. I'm 7 hours in. The way that it works is you have a party of 6 monsters that you can have at any given time. Every monster has a skill tree that it can unlock. Instead of unlocking necessarily moves like you would in Pokemon, it unlocks a skill tree, which is really, really nice. And then the battles are always a 3v3 if you have enough party members to have a 3v3. I think it changes up the Metroidvania formula a lot when it comes to combat, because combat isn't decided in real time. It's decided in turn-based RPG style combat, which I think is really cool. It also rewards you for exploration a lot, because you're rewarded not just by getting new abilities or whatever, but you're rewarded by finding new monsters that you can add to your party, which gives you the level of reward that you get for playing a Pokemon game, where you're like, I can't wait to go to this new route to find a new Pokemon. The other thing that's important to note is the monsters that you unlock actually are your Metroidvania skills. Stuff like double jumping and stuff like that. A lot of it is tied to the monsters that you find. Like, for example, this monster gives you the ability to fly for a little bit, letting you access extra ledges and stuff like that. Overall, think that it does a lot well. The only thing I will say is that the movement in this game doesn't feel amazing, but this game actually has a really decent backtracking system, if I remember correctly. So a lot of the time, backtracking doesn't feel too bad, and the world is massive. Overall, really, really great game. I'm giving it an A. Very, very good. I definitely recommend this. If you are a fan of Pokemon, if you're a fan of Metroidvanias, and you think mixing those two ideas together is fun, definitely worth your time. This is high quality game. Next game is a cute little game called TouHou Luna Nights. This is a game that uses the TouHou world something. I don't know. That's way too anime for me. I only picked it up because it's supposed to be a lot like Symphony of the Night, and honestly, it is. Just look at this walking animation. The movement in this game is pretty solid. You get some decent movement options. Your movement speed is also, this is something I haven't talked about in the previous games, but having a decently high movement speed, it makes the game feel fun to move through. The thing that makes this game really, really stand out, in my opinion, is you do get spells, which are basically sub-weapons that you use MP to cast, which makes combat fun. But another thing that makes combat fun is the overall world design, where the game is designed around stopping time, for example. This is a puzzle example of you need to freeze time to get past a certain puzzle. You can freeze time in combat encounters to do a lot of damage to enemies, like right here. You freeze time, they're stuck still, and then you can throw your daggers out, and then time unfreezes, all those daggers come out and attack at once. Your main form of attacking is by throwing daggers in various different ways and throwing different projectiles. The other thing that's interesting about this game is the graze system. So if you graze an enemy's attack by getting close to it, but not so close that it actually hurts you, you gain extra resources, like your MP comes back. I believe some of your HP even comes back. All the attacks that you do are based off of this clock system. It's a very unique combat experience where it combines bullet hell mechanics, which TouHou is very much known for, and Metroidvania combat, which I think is really, really cool. If you look at the later stage bosses, it gets freaking wild. The final boss is throwing projectiles everywhere. You have to counter with a lot of projectiles. It has a beautiful art style. The music is also insane. The boss fights are fun and fair. Overall, how would I rate this game? TouHou Luna Nights gets an A+. This is also, forgot to mention, this is a short video game, so it's very difficult to get lost. It's very difficult to feel oh, I have to backtrack so far. The game's not that big, so you can beat it in a couple of hours. This playthrough is only 3 hours long. The quality of gameplay during those 3 hours, I think, is good enough that it makes the game worth experiencing, for sure. I also think games that are condensed in their design are more fun than games that are bloated, if that makes sense. If the game just has a bunch of stuff, but none of it's fun, it's not as good as having a smaller game that has way more fun stuff to do. The next game that I'm going to be reviewing is another game by the same developers. It is Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. It is very, very good. Very similar quality to TouHou Luna Nights. The visuals, I think, are even better, even more reminiscent of Symphony of the Night. The main focus of this game, instead of it being based around time, it's based around your 2 elemental mechanics or elemental abilities. You have a wind ability and you have a fire ability. So at any time, I think after a little while, you unlock the ability to switch between like wind attacks and fire attacks. You have multiple different types of weapons you can use. You can use a spear, you can use an axe, you can use swords. You have different spells that you unlock as well. I think the art style is fantastic. The music is really, really good in this game. The boss fights are crazy. The enemy designs, let me try and geek out over some of these enemy designs. Like this harpy, it's so well made. This is one of the early game boss fights. It's a giant dragon, water dragon. The boss fights are really big and interesting, and they usually have some sort of gimmick where you have to switch between fire and wind modes to do additional damage to the boss. Certain bosses will resist wind attacks, or you can completely nullify damage if you are in the correct mode. So if they shoot a wind attack at you, you can absorb it when you're in wind mode, if I remember correctly. And if they shoot a fire attack at you, you can absorb it if you're in fire mode. So you have to keep track of which attacks you're getting hit with and like switching all the time. So the combat's really, really good, needless to say. The movement speed is good. You gain extra movement abilities. You get like a really fast slide as well. You get this glide ability from the very start of the game as well. So at any point, you can kind of like glide around when you're in wind mode. And then when you're in fire mode, you can do a slide that does damage and goes really, really far. And the slide is really, really fast. And then exploration, this game is also kind of small in scope, so you don't really get lost. And all of the backtracking rewards you with like optional bonuses, like optional weapons, optional spells. TouHou Luna Nights does the same exact thing. If you're like backtracking through an area, you are almost always rewarded with some level of like spell or item or equipment that isn't necessary for beating the game, but does make you feel stronger. My final thoughts on Deedlit Wonder Labyrinth is A+ as well. They are both, it's hard for me to pick which game I like more. If I had to pick, I wouldn't necessarily call it an S tier game because the game is pretty short. It's short and sweet, and it doesn't overstay its welcome, but I do kind of wish there was a little bit more. Like if this game was stretched out into a 10-hour game, I wouldn't necessarily complain because I was having fun the whole time. But if I had to pick a favorite, it would be this game over TouHou Luna Nights, and maybe I would say this game deserves like an S or an A++, but not necessarily an S. Not necessarily an S. Very, very solid game. Our next game that I'm going to be reviewing is Dead Cells. I've been getting back into playing Dead Cells. I haven't played a lot, and this is technically more of a more of a roguelike than a Metroidvania, but it obviously borrows a lot of Metroidvania upgrades. Like you go through a level and you get an upgrade, and that upgrade becomes permanent on future runs, stuff like that. I don't have a ton to say other than the movement feels pretty fluid. The combat is really nice. This game does 2D combat pretty dang well. I haven't finished a run through yet, so I don't have like the best inclination of how well the game is made, but my current feelings on the game for how little I've put into it, probably like 4 hours of gameplay on multiple run throughs, none of which have finished. It's a B+. It's pretty fun. It's not my favorite Metroidvania style game I've ever played, but I want to keep playing it and I want to see if it gets better. It might even get better. So it's a little unfair that I'm reviewing it before actually like finishing a run through, but it's a roguelike. You never actually finish playing a roguelike. It's meant to be replayed over and over and over again. So next up is Ori and the Blind Forest. Ori and the Blind Forest, I tried to play earlier this year, and I only played for about 2 hours before I quit, and I haven't picked up the game since. In my first 2 hours, I found the movement to feel pretty fine, I guess. I just couldn't vibe with this game. I couldn't be compelled to continue playing because I didn't find the combat very interesting. It felt like I was just button mashing. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'll try another time to like play it again, but I just couldn't be bothered. I don't know what it was. It just didn't hook me in the first 2 hours. That's all I will say is the game didn't hook me in the first 2 hours. So for that reason, clickbait, I'm giving it an F. I don't actually feel like this is an F tier game. This is a quality video game for sure. I just personally don't recommend it because I couldn't get used to it. I couldn't get into it. So, but as far as clickbait goes, I hate this game. Ori and the Blind Forest? Yuck! Gross! Please leave a comment below telling me how wrong I am so that way it pushes this video into the algorithm. Please and thank you. Rapid fire. Games that you've already seen me play and you should know me for, which is the Castlevania games. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow. I'm giving Dawn of Sorrow an A-. I think the game is great, but the end game is terrible. Combat's fun. The movement is fun. I think this game you can get lost in very easily. And sometimes you're not necessarily 100% rewarded with your exploration, but you're more rewarded by farming enemies for their souls. So because of that, I don't think it's the best. Portrait of Ruin is next. Honestly, it is kind of the same. It's Dawn of Sorrow, but with like partner mechanics, which changes up the combat a little bit, and I think is fun. The main downside is like everything is split up into these little portraits, and some of the portraits are poorly designed in my opinion. I think Nation of Fools sucks. Next up, Order of Ecclesia. Instead of an A-, B+. I think this game is fun. It has decent movement. It has decent combat, but the level system in this game is just so like The fact that all the levels are like separate and it's not like an actual Metroidvania. Like you don't unlock the Metroidvania part until the very end of the game when you go to Dracula. Finding all the villagers is kind of tedious. Doing all the quests for the villagers is kind of tedious. It is definitely the odd one out when it comes to Metroidvanias, but if you like that style of like side quest, grinding, giving yourself a lot of things to do in a Metroidvania, Order of Ecclesia is a good game for you, I guess. Castlevania Circle of the Moon. I'm going to give it C+. It is fine for a Game Boy Advance game, but when you compare it to every other possible Metroidvania game, it's above average. It has this weird thing where it wants to mix classic Vania controls and like Metroidvania castle design. You're like a whip user, but also like it's an open world castle thing. I don't know. And then the DSS system is like completely broken unless you use the DSS glitch. This game with DSS glitch is more like a B+, but if you're playing the game like as intended, it's like a C+. Next up, Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance, a B-. It is the worst castle design out of any Castlevania game I have ever played, but other than that, the game's fine. The movement's great, the combat's great, but God, do I just get lost all the time. Half of the unlocks that you get is like, oh, you found a key that unlocks a specific door. But other than that, the game's pretty good. Next up, we have Castlevania Aria of Sorrow, A+. This game is really, really good. I wouldn't necessarily give it the S tier distinction because I think combat can be a little basic. I think Aria's movement is fine. It has like backdash jumping. It's fine. The castle design is really good in Aria. I think it's some of the most solid castle design that you're going to find. The Chaos Realm is not too annoying, where honestly, Dawn of Sorrow, the only reason it's not an A+ and it's an A- is mostly because the very end of the game for Dawn of Sorrow sucks, where Aria is pretty solid the whole way through. Next up is Castlevania Curse of Darkness. So Castlevania Curse of Darkness was like the first attempt Konami kind of made at making a 3D Metroidvania, but the way that you unlock new skills is based off of the familiars that you find, and then you have to like level up your familiars, and it kind of feels like Pokemon in a weird way, but then they fight alongside you. The movement's kind of slow. The map is basically just a bunch of hallways full of enemies with like small platforming challenges. With all that aside, the game has its charm. It has like this action like combo system, kind of like Devil May Cry, so it feels fun to kind of do combat because of that. My true feelings, the end result, how do I feel about it? Not to do the game dirty, but I give it a C+. I think it's worth playing if you are a big Castlevania fan or a big 3D action game fan. Lament of Innocence, I don't think is a Metroidvania. That game is 100% just level-based. You just walk through levels. Where this game is much more open world, so it fits the definition of the Metroidvania a little bit better. Next up is actually Metroid Fusion. Metroid Fusion is the only other Metroid game I have ever played other than Super Metroid, and my overall feelings is that it's... Fusion is not the best idea for a Metroidvania because everything is like sectioned off into levels and it's incredibly linear. You do backtrack through areas in some regard. I don't know. I'm conflicted on Fusion. I think it's a solid Metroid experience. If you love Metroid style Metroidvanias, it's definitely worth playing. In my opinion, you never really feel too lost backtracking because the game is so linear, but you still fall into the same trap of like certain areas, like you just kind of need to bomb every single wall, shoot every single tile to find like exactly where you need to go. My overall feelings on Metroid Fusion, it's B. It's fun. I think it's pretty good. I had fun playing through it the one time that I played through it, but I'm not looking to replay it anytime soon. Next up, the secret bonus round. Next game is Dark Souls. Dark Souls 1 as a Metroidvania. Well, we know that this game follows a lot of the core tenets of like Metroidvania design, open connected world, backtracking. The combat obviously is like revolutionary in how it's precision, blocking, parrying, rolling in 3 dimensions. I think a lot of games, by the way, a lot of Metroidvanias are obviously inspired by Dark Souls, but they are in 2 dimensions. In my opinion, Dark Souls combat in 2 dimensions does not work a lot of the time because your options are to roll in 2 dimensions, which is basically roll past the guy, and that's it. In 3 dimensions, the way that you roll like actually matters, right? Because rolling through attacks is different than rolling backwards, which is different than rolling to the side. Like it adds so much layers and depth to the combat when you're able to roll in multiple directions. Same with aiming your attacks in 3 dimensions. I think a lot of games just add a roll and a stamina bar, and they're like, it's just like Dark Souls, but it's in 2D and it just does not feel good, in my opinion. This game for me always felt like what a 3D Castlevania game should be like. In my feelings, overall, I'm giving this game an A. Dark Souls 1, it's good. You should play it. Real quick, my opinions on Dark Souls 2, B-. It's really weird. The adaptability system has been memed to death. The game is interconnected, but in like a weird kind of way. You could also beat the game without ever fighting any of the major bosses. You could just grind souls until you beat the game. It's weird. Dark Souls 2 is weird. If you're a big fan of Dark Souls, you can play it. But other than that, it's whatever. Dark Souls 3, A+. Dark Souls 3, I think, is the best iteration of Dark Souls because it gets rid of a lot of the jank that exists in Dark Souls 1, and it's better designed than Dark Souls 2. However, it isn't like super interconnected like Metroidvania style, so that's its major downside, but I think it's just a really, really, really good game. And then last but not least is Elden Ring. Elden Ring is just so good, dude. I will say Elden Ring, the last like 20% of the game is kind of bad. When you're like, everything past Fire Giant, it kind of drags. But god damn, Elden Ring it's like crack cocaine. I literally put like 100 hours into this game over the course of like 2 weeks. And I never do that with video games. I play this game like 8 hours a day. No Bloodborne? I have never played Bloodborne because I never owned a PlayStation 4. If Bloodborne ever came out on fucking PC, it'd probably be an S tier because that game I probably would love. No Demon's Souls, never played it. The two games that I forgot to mention earlier that I definitely have played and have opinions on, one of which is Blasphemous. Blasphemous is Metroidvania, but really it's 2D Dark Souls. This is what I talk about when I talk about games that are 2D Dark Souls. I think it does combat okay, but I think it's very limited because the combat is stuck in 2 dimensions. The game kind of has like a roll system where you can like roll past enemies, you can parry as well. I feel like combat in a game like this in 2 dimensions is like fine, but will never be as good as it would be in a 3D Dark Souls style game when you base the combat based off of like dodging with rolls and like parrying. Granted, you do get like jumping attacks and stuff like that because it's, 2D gives you a jump and stuff like that. I will say this game, as far as exploration goes, blows my mind how unrewarded you are for exploration in this game. You get like 2 upgrades for your character, like ever. I think you get like a double jump after playing the game for like 10 hours. You don't get an additional dash. You don't get a double jump. I think you get the ability to like climb on walls. As far as like a Metroidvania goes, it really is really stingy with giving you like upgrades to your character in the movement department. It'll give you combat upgrades based off of like this weird skill tree thing, if I'm remembering correctly, that honestly didn't feel super rewarding in my opinion. And then like a lot of these items you get, they're like quest items that don't like immediately reward you. I don't know. Exploration always felt bad in this game because it felt like I was never being rewarded for it. And the combat felt a little bit not as good as it could have been, but good for the style that they were going for. Overall, I never finished the game because I just couldn't be bothered. I got like 10 hours in and then just got so incredibly bored. This is probably the most controversial thing on here. Blasphemous, it's C tier. It's fine. It's high quality. It's clear that they put a lot of thought into the design of the game. It's just that I personally don't like those design decisions. But if you think the atmosphere of the game and the art design and the world design is good enough to keep you wanting to play the game I will not, the graphics 10 out of 10, the art design, the art direction 10 out of 10. This game clearly had a vision for what it wanted to be and it nailed it. However, that is not enough for me to want to continue playing a game alone. The gameplay, unfortunately for me, just did not hit. And then the other game that I forgot to mention that I've definitely played is Momodora River Under the Moonlight. It's Momodora 4. It's part of the Momodora series. They're Metroidvanias. This one does have some Dark Souls influence where you have like a dodge roll like that, where you can dodge roll behind enemies. You have like a 3-hit combo with the weapon that you have. I will say I like this game a lot because it's very cute. I like the art style. I like the music. The game is quite difficult. The game isn't about like punishing you on death necessarily, but it does force you to restart to your like last checkpoint when you die. But it's not about like, oh, you died so you lost all of your stuff and you'll never get it back. It's more so like you died so you lost a little bit of progress. Combat's interesting. You also have a bow to supplement your combat, which is fun. So you can like shoot stuff with your bow. You can slash with your sword. Movement wise, the movement's pretty decent. You get like a double jump, you get like all these other abilities. You get like a cat transformation later on in the game as well. You get a dash. Overall, it's a small condensed Metroidvania similar to TouHou Luna Nights. The game can be beaten in like 2 hours, but it's a fun 2-hour experience. So for me, this game is an A+ for me. I think it has great art direction, great art style, great music, great movement. The combat is fun. You do get rewarded for exploration with additional like bonus abilities and bonus attacks, stuff like that. It's an honest-to-God Metroidvania experience, and it's short and sweet. And lastly, we gotta talk about the 2 games that I feel like I don't even need to talk about. The only 2 S+, it's Symphony of the Night and it's Super Metroid. It is boggling my brain that these games came out 25 plus years ago. And still to this day, nobody has figured out how to take the formula that these games have created and surpass it. I don't get it. I don't think there's a game that is a better pure Metroidvania experience than Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid. They are slightly different in their approaches. I can make an entire video just talking about why they are the peak of the Metroidvania like design philosophy and why they are slightly different but still follow the same peak design philosophy. Maybe I'll make that video in the future. For me, they follow the tenets of movement in both games is very, very fluid, very good, very fun. Exploration in both games is rewarded better than in any other Metroidvania for the most part. I think Super Metroid in particular rewards exploration more than any Metroidvania I have ever played. And then combat, both games view combat in different ways. Where Symphony of the Night, combat is meant to be a spectacle, and Super Metroid, combat is meant to be more of a challenge. But again, I'll make a whole video talking about it some other day. That is every Metroidvania I have ever played ranked. In the YouTube video, I will have a tier list that I will show here, the final rankings. Tell me what you think about these games. Am I stupid? Do I have terrible taste? Am I smart? Am I the greatest Metroidvania gamer of all time? I also need to play more Metroidvanias, so if you have Metroidvanias that you want to recommend, you could also leave those in the comments. But I'm done with this video. Please subscribe. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good one.